Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. And welcome to our 19th episode of More Than Just Money series, a series for anything that is Islamic finance related. My name is Azmi, and I'll be your host for tonight. Islamic Finance at SG, or IF at SG, is a community of scholars, finance professionals, and students in the Islamic finance. What started out as a WhatsApp group has now become a society in the making, with a long-term goal to serve the Singaporean community through Islamic finance. In today's More Than Just Money series, we'll be getting to know how we can incorporate Islamic finance in our daily lives. We'll have a Q&A session at the later part in about the last 10 minutes of this session. You may ask your questions in the Slido link down below. Today's evening, we are honored to have with us today a scholar in Islamic finance based in the United Kingdom. Do allow me to introduce Mufti Faraz Adam. Mufti Faraz Adam is a well-known UK-based Islamic finance and fintech consultant and heads the global Sharia advisory firm Amanah Advisors. He is currently advising several global Islamic financial institutions spreading across the UK, US, Canada, Malaysia, Singapore, the UAE, and other countries as well. He is passionate about the development of the Islamic economy and serves across its various sectors such as Islamic banking, Islamic capital markets, takaful, SME financing, and Islamic social finance. Mufti Faraz has completed a 6-year Alamiah program in the UK, after which he went on to specialize in Islamic law and finish a Mufti course in Durban, South Africa. He holds a master's degree in Islamic finance, banking, and management from Newman University, UK. He is qualified with an MBA diploma from the International Business Management Institute and successfully accomplished a fintech specialization course from the University of Michigan. He recently achieved the ACCA Level 4 qualification. We are happy and honored to have you with us today this evening, Mufti Faraz. So without further ado, shall we go to the first question of this evening?
Sure. Bismillah. Go ahead.
All right, so the first question of this evening is more of an introductory questions. So you went through the Alamiah program, then specialized in Islamic law, and then finished the Mufti course in Durban. Could you share with us what led you to have an interest in Islamic finance?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajmain. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Respected brothers, sisters, and friends. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you all here today. So the question is, what led me to an interest in Islamic finance? Well, I think I personally am very passionate about this idea of super specialization, right? I believe every scholar, every student of knowledge should super specialize. I think the demand and requirement of today's era and the advancement that we're seeing in the world, it needs people, students of knowledge, students of Islamic law to super specialize in an area. It's not sufficient, the way I see it, just to be a scholar today. I think what we need is specialists in certain areas. So you have Islamic finance, you have halal economy, halal food, you have medical fiqh and things with medical issues, right? You have matters in ibadat and worship, which need specialization. Wills, estate, probate, how does that work? Family planning, estate planning, all these things are areas which need specialization. Social matters, marital matters, right? These are things which need people to specialize in. So my interest was always in Islamic finance because it was, when I was a student, it was the one area which was developing very fast. And as a student, I always had this dream and passion to do ijtihad, right? It was like this thing, I want to like grow up and like explore new ideas and do new things. And so I saw Islamic finance as one safe area potentially to explore and try to contribute something, because it was developing constantly. Whereas everything else, I found it to be slow paced in relatively to Islamic finance. So that's what, so I would say probably from the first or second year of my studies, I was already reading about Islamic finance, researching, and I spent my 5-6 years focused on Islamic finance. And then that's what I knew when I wanted to become a mufti. This is where I wanted to specialize in. And I think that's very important for all students. You should have a long-term outlook on where you want to see, where you want to be. So you should see yourself 20 years from now, where do you want to be? And then work backwards. How do you get there? Right. So if 20 years time, I want to be, for example, my goal was I want to be like the famous scholar Sheikh Mufti Taqi Uthmani, right? the famous Islamic finance. That was my goal. I want to be like him. How do I be like him? I've got to do all these things to even get there. And I would say that to everybody. You should all have a role model. Find somebody who's doing something very good, productive for humanity, for Islam, and which gets you close to Allah, and chart your way. Everybody should have like a role model in that sense to develop your own self and to leave a legacy for yourself.
Thank you for the introduction. I think we can really see your passion that you have from the way you speak about Islamic finance, and we can really see it from the way you speak. So moving on to the next question, Mufti Faraz, you live in the UK where Muslims are a minority, similar to us Singaporeans in Singapore. So could you share with us how would you explain Islamic finance to two different individuals? So the first individual is a non-Muslim, and the second individual is a Muslim who previously don't know or not aware about the Islamic finance. How would you explain to these two individuals?
A very interesting question. The way I would explain Islamic finance to non-Muslims is telling them that, look, Islam and Sharia, the guidance of Allah, all of it is for our benefit in this world and ultimately in the hereafter. Every ruling, every guidance from Allah, there is an inherent benefit in it. Okay? And there's levels of benefit. So for example, when we fast, we're not fasting because we want to lose weight, right? That's a benefit, but it's not necessarily the reason why we fast. But every action has a benefit, and even Islamic finance has a benefit. We have data now to show and prove that the Islamic finance model is more beneficial as a system and as an economy than the conventional system. I mean, if you look at the global financial crisis, what were some of the key things, amongst many others, some of the key things were these mortgage-backed securities, this trading and selling of debt and loans, right? Insurance, AIG, insuring these banks, mortgages, subprime mortgages being given, right? All these factors from an Islamic perspective are not Sharia compliant, right? Why? Because there's a clear reason why. So when we explain Islamic finance to non-Muslims, we have to make them understand that the principles of Islam have been designed for a benefit for not only human beings, but for the world, right? So even this idea of circular economy, which I'm currently I'm very passionate about that, this idea, and I clearly see the wisdom and the reasoning of it and the need for it. If we look at the world, the way that Allah has designed the world, there's no such thing as waste in the natural world. But humans, we create a lot of waste. So we have to kind of align ourselves with the teachings of Islam to have a better existence and a meaningful existence. That's the key thing, right? So if I was to explain, to summarize to a non-Muslim, it's making them understand that the guidance in Islamic finance and to have an Islamic economy can only be beneficial for us because we're not dealing in debt. We can see the harms of debt today. Inflation, look at all these inflation issues that we're having, is because for many reasons, but one of them is the government's borrowing and printing more money, right? There's multiple reasons. So all these things prove to us that this system, it needs rethinking. What's the alternative out in the world right now, which is functioning, which is a $3 trillion market? Islamic finance, right? So why not give it a go?
That's a beautiful answer, Mufti Faraz. So you mentioned that how we have to believe that Islamic finance is something that that brings benefit, that we can derive benefit from the whole Islamic economy. And I also understand that if Islamic finance is such a marvelous divine framework, and you have also mentioned in your article that in your article titled Islamic Finance in One Principle, that the objective is to transact according to God's framework and guidelines, which ultimately how we can derive benefit from it. So is there a reason why do you think that it is still not the prevalent way to do finance? So you have already mentioned the different backlash or the different negative remarks of the current conventional finance, where they are doing a lot of debts, a lot of printing of money, is damaging to the economy. But why is it still the way the banking is working right now? And is there something that they are missing, or is there something that Islamic finance is missing out, that they are totally not adopting it into their system?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. See, in the article that you referenced, and the whole objective is that human beings are the greatest asset on this earth, right? They're the greatest asset. If a human is rectified, the world will be rectified. That's why Allah tells us in the Quran, حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ, that Allah will not change the world until people change themselves, right? The human beings are the greatest asset. They're the focus of everything. When the prophets were sent by Allah, the prophets' role was to work on human beings, right? Human beings are the greatest entrepreneurs. They're the ones that do everything. The tech follows human beings. It's human beings which invent. It's human beings which innovate. They're the ones who create. Human beings have the greatest potential to change the world and also harm the world, right? So Islamic finance is there to shape human beings, and the entire Sharia really is there to develop good human beings. That's the whole point. Because if you have good human beings, you'll have meaningful people, there will be productivity in the world, right? When you have corrupted humans, then it's just a matter of a waste. It's a matter of like overconsumption, consumerism. It's a matter of harming each other. It's a matter of invading, war, fighting. All these things happen because of corruption, greed, love for power, love for fame. So Islamic finance is there primarily to make sure that our economic side of our life is done in a way which elevates us human beings to be more godly, to be more mindful of Allah, to function in a way which is beneficial for everybody. Why? Because Islam sees transactions as social interactions. It's very important to understand this. A transaction is not just an exchange in Islam. That's why there's a guidance on how to transact, what to transact in. You're not allowed to do things which have ambiguity, jahala, gharar, uncertainty, or to have unfair terms, because you're dealing with human beings. And because the market and the economy is a social, it's very social, everyone's interconnected. If there are issues in the society, in the market, that will transcend and transpire into the society. So what Islam doesn't want is that people are going to the mosque together, to the masjid together, and their hearts are all split because in the markets, they cheated one another, or they deceived one another, or they were practicing gharar, or unfair terms, or all these things. So Islam sees a community as one. Whether you're in the markets, whether in the masjid, wherever you are, in the university, it shouldn't be that the way you practice and the way you buy and sell in the market has an impact on the social cohesion. Because the only way we as a group can recognize Allah is if we're together, if there's clean heart, if there's togetherness. Because Islam calls towards togetherness. That's why we have 5 times salah together in the masjid, right? That's why we have Jumu'ah together, right? So it's very important that, and coming to your last point about, are we missing something? Yes, we are missing something. There's many things missing because, look, an Islamic economy needs multiple institutions. Banking is one of the institutions, or let's not say banking, let's just say intermediary services, right? We need somebody who can direct surplus or liquidity to deficits, right? Where there's surplus and deficits, we need somebody to manage that, to direct those surpluses to productive areas. So the banks try to do this right now. That's why investment banks are potentially better model for Islamic finance than your retail banking, potentially, right? But they're doing that role of intermediation. So we need that, but it's one institution. We need good Islamic capital markets. We need takaful. We need the institution of zakat, of waqf, of Baytul Mal. And also on top of that, we need Islamic governance, right? At a more macro level. That will ensure that the system, and also you can't be in an economy if you have riba and Islamic finance together. There's always going to be some kind of like mixing, some kind of like interaction. You'll never achieve the goal and vision that we have, right? You'll never achieve that. Yes, but what we need to do as individuals is make sure my single transaction is Sharia compliant. My savings deposit is Sharia compliant. My financing is Sharia compliant. At an individual level, Islamic finance serves that. But what we want to achieve at a macro level, it needs many more institutions in existence to achieve that goal.
Thank you for your answer. I think I'm really processing what you have said, and what really struck me is when you say that the transaction in Islamic finance is a social interaction, and then you mentioned how as an economy we are interconnected, meaning that we don't try to eat other people's wealth like unjustly, because if we are interconnected, we will be hurt. And I was just making a very quick comparison in the conventional market, whereby when they are placing their orders of bets, right, they are hoping that the other side of their bets are losing, so they can gain as much as possible. So I really think this is the beauty of what Islamic finance has to offer, which is you succeed as a community, and then that's how you uplift the whole community and prosper as together, as compared to the one model that we have in the conventional banking. So let's move on to investing, since we are on investing already, and this is where most retail audience are actually very interested in. With the plethora of investment available from ETFs to mutual funds and the recent NFT craze, so what is the right approach to ascertain whether an investment is halal? Because of course, we as Muslims need to make sure that what we invest in is halal. So what are the things to ascertain that is halal besides having a Sharia scholar to back an investment?
Yes, it's a very good question. Every investment will have some particulars, right? Because the way you screen a certain asset class might be different to the way you screen another asset class. So, for example, if you're looking at shares have a different kind of methodology when screening, as opposed to if you're looking at an investment in real estate and property, right? If you're buying property. So both are investments, but their levels of screening and the particulars and the framework might be somewhat different. But the key thing is, look, at the end of the day, just like our physical bodies can't, or we're not permitted to, and it's not good for us to do, right? To do wrong, evil, sin, right? The same thing, our money should not be utilized in sinful activity or vice sectors or negative sectors. That's the key idea. As long as your money is circulating in a positive environment, in an environment of productivity, in an environment of something which is aligned with Islam, the values of Islam, and good values, then it's fine. Majority hopefully should be fine, right? But if your money is circulating or is entering into something which is not positive for the society, or it's not positive spiritually, morally, mentally, psychologically, right, economically, then it will not be permitted. That's the essence of Islam. Islam, everything that is prohibited in Islam either harms a person spiritually, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, economically, right? Those are the prohibitions. That's why the entire deen and sharia is based on maslah and masalih, benefits. It can't be that something in Islam is harmful for you. It's just not possible. Because Allah is the most wise, right? And his sharia is perfect. So to a very simple way to understand, if your money is circulating in something harmful, it will not be permissible. If it's circulating in part of something which is beneficial, it'll be permissible. Yes, of course, there are some conditions also to that, because it's not always that easy and simple. And that's where the scholars will come in. Then that's why you need a scholar, somebody who's more well-versed to look at the more detailed matters. But as a first step, if you want a simple answer, this is your first step and your first kind of like personal check where your money is being invested.
Okay, so you mentioned about how for it to be a good investment, it has to be in a good circulation, and then in a bad investment is a like bad kind of circulation. But what about assets that are like neutral classes, like it doesn't really have a bad effect and a good effect? So how would you approach this kind of investment?
I mean, even a neutral class will have some kind of positive thing, right? It just relatively, we're looking at relatively what is the effect, right? There's nothing which is neutral ever, right? But typically speaking, when you're looking at different asset classes, every asset class will have its own particular treatment, which have to be reviewed and make sure that we understand that to then give a wholesome answer.
Okay. So we were just mentioning about stocks, and there are some Sharia screening numbers that is currently in place just for guidelines purposes. So we have the justification for wanted ruling for stocks, and understandably, it is a monumental fatwa issued by Sheikh Nizam Yathubi back in 1996 to allow Muslim investors to participate in the stock market globally. But the question here is it time that we revise this wanted and the 5% threshold ruling for impermissible income to be much more stricter? And the reason is because Since the ruling on riba is actually very heavy in Sharia, so should we revise this 1/3 and 5% threshold for stock screening?
A very good question. I mean, the ratios have come from a number of scholars, right? It's been also been accepted by IOFI standards. So it's more or less like a global scholarly approval, right? When it comes to these revising and looking at these numbers were relative to a certain time in the industry or in the markets, but more or less these are like cautious. I mean, these are, I would say, like the maximum that you can use. There's no harm in you adopting something less, right? So if the standard is 30%, why not adopt 20% in your own investments or 10%? That's a good thing to do. Nobody will say that's a bad thing. That's a good thing. We don't have to wait for standards to be set at the macro level to then change our practice. Rather, you should be looking at even those investments which are 0%, right, altogether, debt-free fund investments. You should be looking for interest-free investments, debt-free investments, and potentially 0% impure income investments. And somebody should create, and I'm sure there are efforts in the world, different people trying to create portfolios and highlight investments which fill these criteria. I know one of the companies we're advising, they work on, actually two companies, they work on 20% ratios, okay? They don't work on a 30% ratio because for them, they feel that's the more conservative and better, and the practice is let's reduce that more and more because look, the more we channel our money to 0% companies, the more demand there'll be in those companies, the more it'll be better for those companies overall in the markets. The price of the stocks will increase. There'll be more desire. That will then have an impact in the way that company operates and also in the entire market. When the people start seeing that funds are being allocated to those companies which are debt-free, no interest, naturally there'll be a greater interest and desire in adopting such a practice. Right? So as investors, as traders, we can dictate to some degree behavior of companies by our resources. If we channel our resources, our investments to those companies which are 0% and debt-free, we can change the status quo, I believe.
Okay, since we're also talking about screening, let me just go a bit tangent and talk about ESG screening, which is a very hot topic these days, and fund managers try to incorporate it in their funds. So why do you think is the right approach to screen funds by incorporating not just Sharia, but also ESG in their portfolio screening?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's no harm in it. It's actually good. These are positives, right? Because we know that the current world, the world that we live in, is a lot of waste, is a lot of disregard for many things, right? And I just written a recent article on manipulation in the markets, right? Where I mentioned several layers of Sharia governance. The most basic level is ensuring that the contract that you've entered into is Sharia compliant. But then there's other layers of Sharia governance as well. The way the market's functioning, the way participants in the market are functioning, the practices. So if you're making an investment, yes, as long as the contract is Sharia compliant, it's good. But then if the company is doing things which are harmful to others, right, or harmful for society, or they don't have good governance, that's also not a good thing, right? And even Sharia wants us to add those. So just because a contract is Sharia compliant and your investment is Sharia compliant, that means when we say it's compliant, it means the way the investment was made, that process was Sharia compliant. It doesn't mean then what people are doing with that money is also going to be always positive. Okay? Meaning you can invest in my company, but then I might go and harm somebody. Yeah, your contract was fine, right? Your investment was halal, but then my own behavior is problematic. So I'm harming somebody, I'm lying. That's nothing wrong with your money. That's nothing wrong with your money or your investment, but it's my behavior. So ESG tries to change behavior of companies. And then we have the data which tracks that. What's their behavior like? So it's a good thing. So one is your investment, which is your contract and your cash flow. Second is the behavior, which is also part of Sharia. So ESG from that regard is actually a Sharia filter because Sharia wants good behavior. And many of the ESG criteria that we see that they're tracking and they're reviewing is aligned with Sharia, without a doubt, right? When you're looking at governance, social as well, what you look at the way your employees are treated, what kind of like labor rights do you have? How do you deal with one another? How's HR? That's all part of Islam.
Yeah, it's actually quite beautiful to see that what the world starting to recognize these days has already been mentioned in Islamic finance since the start of Islam. And the world is maybe slowly to catch up and to see like what the industry or the investment industry is needing right now. So we are living in the age where technology is constantly evolving. This include tech in finance like the DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, DeFi, and NFT, just to name a few. What would your advice be to Muslims to approach and embrace this transformation that is happening in this space that we do not know the Sharia status of this? So, for example, NFT, we don't know whether it is Sharia compliant. How would you advise Muslim approaching in this NFT space?
I mean, firstly, I would say the entire sector and industry. There's a lot of like fraudulent practice, and bad practice. I would just tell everybody, be very careful, be very cautious, not only looking at one is from the halal and haram side, but even something may seem to be halal, but you don't know the intention of the people behind the screen. So be very mindful and cautious of what you're doing. Check for legitimacy. Very important, right? Check how legitimate anything that's being shown to you, because look, there's no governance framework right now governing all of this space, right? Regulators are still developing the regulation. Right now we have some kind of tax regulation, right? But we still don't have actual only in some countries the regulators have taken a stance, but many regulators still left it open for the industry to organically grow. So I would say be very careful, be very mindful. On top of that, what I would say is when it comes to the Sharia compliance, we've written on Amana Advisor's website, there's quite a few articles on these things. I would tell everybody to read that. It'll be beneficial to read those articles just to give you an understanding of like what's clearly okay, what's clearly not okay. And then the best kind of like advice would be anytime you have a doubt or suspicion or you're not confident with any investment, abstain from it. Simple as that. You won't lose out by not investing in an opportunity if you're feeling doubtful. Only invest in those things where you're confident, comfortable, and you feel positive from an Islamic perspective, that's halal, and also from a legitimacy perspective, there's no fraudulent activity taking place.
Yes, okay. So for example, we have an investment asset class that as a normal Muslim on the street, so we are looking on the internet and then we research, we see like there are different fatwas issued by different organization saying that something is halal according to one and something is not halal according to the other. So how do you think someone would approach these two different fatwas, and which one would they take? So just for an example, the recent fatwa on crypto. So Malaysia said that it's permissible to invest in it, while Indonesia say that it's not. So how would you approach or advise Muslims to approach this kind of situation?
Yeah, so I mean, the scholars, when they write about different views, they typically put two conditions down. They mention that you should follow the scholars that you feel are most knowledgeable in an area and have piety, the most piety, right? So these obviously, it's not easy to say, how do you judge piety, right? But somebody who you feel is in the presentation and in the writings reminds you of Allah. That's, I think, very important. That's a show of piety, because if a person doesn't have any piety, they wouldn't remember Allah, right? So that's very important. And then secondly, knowledgeable. Like, so you look at the research that's done, right? Those are two, I would say, ways and tools to determine which opinion to follow. Then also for us, I would say it's worthwhile and wise to have a local scholar or somebody you can locally turn to, who you trust. Okay, so trust is very important. You should trust somebody who's local, and then if they're a scholar, they can say, you know what, the evidence of this view seems to be stronger, right? They'll help you navigate that. So I think it's very important for us as individuals always have connection with scholars locally, somebody who you can turn to regularly. And this is an advice for everybody. It's a general advice. always have a connection with scholars. That will help you in many ways in your life, because it's the scholars who are the inheritors of the prophets, right? Al-ulama warathatul anbiya, the hadith tells us. So them being the inheritors of the prophets, they have a natural attachment with the teachings of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they'll be able to guide you in your day-to-day lives when you need that guidance, when you can't get guidance anywhere. So it's very important to have that connection with scholars, and they'll help you in navigating these tricky issues.
Okay, thank you for the answer. We are in the last two questions of this session before we proceed the Q&A. So for those of you who have questions, do go down to the link down below and type in your questions. So the next question goes to the next question is for the Muslim on the street. So it's better to teach someone how to fish rather than telling them or giving them the fish. So this I'm transferring this to how we as Muslim would just find if something is halal or haram. Instead, should we as Muslim have a minimum knowledge of muamalat before being involved in this space, so as we can analyze an asset class without depending on just on scholars, because that it won't be like an everyday thing whereby you can see an asset class and a Sharia status. So what are the minimum knowledge that Muslims should have in muamalat before they even go into this investing space?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, right, the second Khalifa of Islam, he was very, very clear about this, where he made it mandatory on anybody who comes to the markets to trade to know about muamalat. You have to know, you can't. And it's actually a principle in Sharia. It's compulsory upon somebody to know the rulings of something they're about to engage in. So for example, if a person, if you have to fast, it's compulsory to know the rulings of fasting, right? Likewise, if you are going to get married, it's compulsory to learn about nikah and marriage, what it is, right? So same thing with muamalat. If you're trading, if you're investing, it's compulsory upon you to learn that the at least a minimum amount which can allow you to do things in a halal way. And it's a very, very valid point that you've raised, because how many people who are investing have no knowledge on these matters, right? It's not easy for everybody to sit down and learn muamalat for 6 months, 1 year. It's hard. That's why we have screening providers out there, right? So you have many stock screeners, which you can use, not a problem. But yeah, I would definitely encourage everybody to devote some time in the week on a continuous basis learning about Islam in your muamalat. Very important. It'll take years, but it's well worth it. Every hour spent is reward for you. You're learning knowledge. It's interesting. So it's well worth having a timetable and lifestyle which revolves around learning and education.
I see. I think that's a great answer. You mentioned how we could, as of now, if someone do not have the knowledge in muamalat, they could use this Sharia screen just to, because they don't have the current knowledge, but in the future where they have gained the knowledge, they can then depend on themselves to actually analyze these kind of screenings. Okay, so now we are down to the last question. We're going to talk about understanding riba. So you mentioned in your article titled "Can We Really Understand Riba?" that scholars before us had difficulty comprehending the prohibition on riba. But as you rightfully mentioned, we now have more data and precedents to understand why riba was prohibited. Will you share with us some advice on how to approach future innovations that could potentially be ribawi?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, when I was, if you look at the classical books of fiqh, right, and Islamic law, you'll see when scholars discuss riba, they discuss how the illah and the rationale behind riba, the legal reasoning it seems to be very hidden and obscure. Scholars would debate that what is it about riba? What is the underlying factor that makes it prohibited, right? And even in fact, the different madhahib and schools of fiqh have a difference in opinion on what the legal reasoning is. So some will say, no, it's food stuff. Some will say, no, it's thamaniya and money. Some scholars said, no, it's kale and qadar, right? And ma'al jins. So it's, for example, it's your measurement tool or the way you measure and homogeneous items. It's got nothing to do with food stuff. So the madhabs and the scholars themselves have differed in approaching riba because it's such an obscure phenomenon. It's something very amazing. And that's what when I mentioned in the article, the scholars have said this is something from the hidden things which very few people understand, right? And some scholars wrote, I've been trying to understand riba until now, I've not understood it properly. And that's the reality. And what I was trying to potentially express in the article was, with the data now that we have, and sadly we're living in an economic system of riba, right? The harms of riba are much more clear to us, right? We can see what riba does at a macro level. We've got the data and statistics. In those times, there was no kind of like analysis of data, right? At the macro level, you can't do modeling or anything of that sort. It was just mere observation at a very simple level. But we have all this data now. We can track trends. We can see what's happening in the markets. It should give us much more confidence then, right? Those scholars and those in those times, they never needed further assurance. They believed that riba is prohibited. There's no need to go towards it. Us and our iman and faith is so weak, right? We always look for a wisdom. We look for assurance, confidence. So we should be so clear to us the harms of riba with the data that we have available of what's happening in the global financial crisis. All these things. Look at the economies which are underdeveloped, right? And emerging markets. Look at how their systems are running, right? Because they owe riba to the IMF, right? They've borrowed so much money from other countries and from other funds in the world that the riba itself, when it compounds, it's completely crippling them, right? It doesn't allow them to be productive. And then what do? They sell their natural resources as a collateral or give it away to these big corporations and these countries. And therefore, these countries are always enslaved and indebted. So that shows you clearly that riba is something harmful. And there's so much to say on this topic, so much to discuss. But how do we navigate innovations? I've got this idea that I really like, I believe will make a difference in navigating innovations, which I call a Sharia sandbox, right? Like how regulators have fintech sandboxes, right? So for example, in the United Kingdom, in Bahrain, I think in Singapore, potentially you have a sandbox as well, where new startups can come and the regulator will give them a special treatment in that sandbox, will understand their product and help them test their product. Because to understand something, you need to have at least a controlled environment where you can test that thing, right? So if in Sharia, we develop this idea of a sandbox, a Sharia sandbox, whereby as long as there's nothing clearly prohibited, allow for an innovation to grow and be tested in a safe environment. So there's no fatwa that's issued for or against. Rather, give it 5 years. Let it test, let it function, let it organically grow in this safe space. Scholars should agree that right now we're not going to issue any fatwa, neither against, neither for. Let it naturally grow. We analyze, have economists, have legal experts, have tech experts, all analyze what's happening. And then after 5 years, issue a fatwa. Look, this is good for the market, this is not good for the market, because we've got 5 years of observation. That would be permissible under the principle, al-aslu fil ashya al-ibaha, that the essence or foundational principle in everything is permissibility, right? So as long as there's nothing clearly prohibited in an innovation, we can adopt this principle to test new ideas in a safe environment that would allow for faster adoption. Because what's happening now, look at crypto. The entire world, somebody says not permissible, other person says permissible, other person says not sure, other person, it leaves everybody confused, right? And also it impacts innovation and growth, right? And potentially what happens is the Muslim world and the Islamic economy is left behind many a time. We're just playing catch up, right? So it's at the same time, we don't want to be reckless, right? You don't want to be reckless and say everything's halal and carry on. No, there needs to be solid reasoning, solid research. But I think this kind of safe space, of a sandbox with multiple scholars involved, will really help understand these challenging. It's not easy. That's why it's not easy. Understanding fintech is not easy. Imagine mu'amalat is so challenging, right? To understand these innovations, somebody now needs to understand mu'amalat in a very detailed an expert level, then understand finance, then understand technology. Only then can you really begin to discuss in this area, before which it becomes very challenging. So there's very few people in the world who'll have the time, passion, ability to go through that journey. So that's why we need more experts. We need more individuals from all backgrounds, not only scholars. We need tech experts. We need legal experts. We need economists. We need financial experts. This is a group effort. We need people from different backgrounds coming together and adding to the body of knowledge.
I think that's a beautiful example of how we can, in the future, approach these new inventions to make sure that they are really Sharia compliant. So, from what I understand from this Sharia sandbox that you're proposing is 5 years, let them do whatever they want, and then we see what are the effects of it. What are the effects to the economy, to the society, and then whether they are actually giving any positive impact. And I think one of the key thing that is required in this sandbox is everyone to come in together, like working as one Islamic body, not just like midway 1 or 2 years you decided to come up with your fatwa to say that this is haram or this is halal, which what you have said happened in the crypto, which caused confusion rather than a cohesion in the Islamic community. So I think we are rushing a bit of time, so we have about less than 5 minutes for Q&A. So is it okay if I shift to Q&A now, Mufti? Okay, I will present a full screen. For those of you, we have a Q&A session at Slido, so please insert your questions at the Slido link in the chat box. Okay, so I will share my screen just to show the questions. And let me see here. Okay, so Mufti, if you like, we can go through the order until the time is up, and then we can close the session if that's comfortable for you.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, no problem.
Okay, so the first question is how to identify halal crypto.
Yeah, it's hard one, that is. I mean, you have to review the white paper, I would say. Understand that there's nothing prohibited in the white paper. So the thing is, you need to understand what is prohibited then, right? That's where the knowledge of mu'amalat comes in. But analysis of white paper is integral.
Okay, yeah. So we have to see the white paper, and from the white paper, we have to understand how that crypto coin particularly work, and then we can see for ourselves if it's halal or not.
That's right. I've written an article on this, right? I think it's called My Thoughts on Crypto, where I mentioned 4 or 5 levels of screening. So you need to look at what the project is about, the token, what utility the token is giving you, financials, if it's a security token, is very important. Staking mechanism, how that operates, farming, liquidity, pooling, all these things need to be looked at independently.
Yes. So I guess if you are looking into this very niche technology, we also have to understand how these different mining or staking works in order for us to make the correct judgment whether it is actually haram or halal in the eyes of Sharia. Okay, so moving on to the next question. What is, Mufti, your definition of intrinsic value? And do you recognize the fiat money system as being inherently riba? If not, why?
I mean, the intrinsic value it's a philosophical term, right? From a Sharia perspective, it's not, the concern is an intrinsic value, because what is value, right? Value is a notion. Value is very relative. I might value something, you might not value something, right? It's a relative term. It's a philosophical term. Sharia looks at utility, not at value, not at intrinsic value, right? So when something has utility, naturally you'll use it, you'll benefit. So it's all about whether something has benefit in it or not. It's not about utility, or it's not about intrinsic value, right? That's how do you define that? Are you using a philosophical definition of intrinsic value? If so, then how are you imposing that on Sharia, right? Sharia has its own framework of understanding things.
Yes. So I guess once something has a utility, people see what is it being used for, then that's where value would come into these things.
So, but utility is a driving force. If you look at things from a utility perspective and benefit perspective, it becomes far easier to discuss rather than debating the philosophical nature of intrinsic value, because it's just that discussion and debate never ends.
Yes. Okay. I guess we are running out of time, so we just do one last question. Have you heard of Marhaba DeFi? If yes, what are your thoughts about it as a solution for ethical and halal financial platform?
Yeah, I mean, look, I personally, I've not reviewed everything they're doing, but there's some good brothers there. But I can't give a fatwa view. I'm not on a Sharia board. I've not looked at their documents or anything. But every person should do their own due diligence before investing, and look at the Sharia board, understand who they are. Contact the Sharia board if you have any questions. That's what they're there for, to interact. And that's all really. But I'm not in a position to say anything about any particular institution, organization.
All right, I guess. Okay. I'm really sorry that we are running out of time now, and I believe there's a lot more that we like to ask or we like to question Mufti Faraz, but time is not on our side. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Mufti Faraz, and to answer all of these questions that we have. And for the rest of you, do look out on IF@SG space for the next episode of More Than Just Money, a series for anything that is Islamic finance related. So once again, thank you to all participants. See you again. Good night and stay safe. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.